Aw.
All right. So where were you on September 11th?
I was in Bayfield Heights, on the job, working at a computer.
All right, that answers the what were you doing part. So what did 9/11 mean to you?
It was definitely scary. It meant that we need to be prepared and that security should be forefront in our minds.
Okay, go. Where were you on 9/11?
I was on active duty, working my shift on the USS Constellation, when me and my crew members were watching on the Armed Forces Network the news reports of airplanes crashing into the buildings. We were on our way from Hawaii to San Diego, and the captain came over the 1MC and told us that we'd be delayed getting home. We were sent to patrol the coast, the west coast, and ensure that no other flights were attempting to enter U.S. airspace.
So what were you doing when you first heard?
I think I was eating breakfast at my desk. I was checking email and checking the logs on the Exchange server. I was the mail admin, and the television was just to my right, and the first plane had already crashed into the one tower, and we had the images up and watched the second plane crash. It was very heartbreaking.
So what did 9/11 mean to you?
9/11 to me meant that you're not as prepared as you think you are, and you can never have too much planning, too much contingency planning in place, too much training and first response, and also there's circumstances that no one can control. There's always going to be disasters that we might not be able to fully prevent. We just have to be prepared mentally and physically to respond to those disasters.
Okay. Where were you on 9/11?
I was down at Marshall Space Flight Center on a 3-week work detail. I had just got down there on Sunday, and then I believe it was that Tuesday, it was 9/11. Might have been a Monday or Tuesday that 9/11 happened. And so I spent the remainder of the 3 weeks down there away from my family and home during this 9/11 aftermath.
And what were you doing when you heard it happened?
We were watching the TV, the Link TV down there at Marshall, waiting for our meeting to start, and we were watching the news, and we just saw the first plane hit the tower, and then we kept going on from there.
So what did 9/11 mean to you?
It meant the attack on our country. It meant that our way of life was being threatened by an enemy.
Recording.
On September 11th, 2001, I was at home. I was recovering from surgery, and when I saw what had happened, my first thing that came through my mind was safety of my family. And my wife got our children out of school, so we had everybody home. And my father passed away earlier in the year, so I checked on my mom. We were very concerned about what might happen next, and so I just wanted to make sure that my family was safe. It was a very tough time.
Don't look up. Okay. You could talk anytime.
Oh. When I first heard about it, I was still at home, and at that time they thought it was just a horrible accident. By the time I got to work, first thing I did was find a radio and turn it on to see what else was happening. By then, they knew that it was not an accident. By then, I think the second plane had already hit. And I remember I just knew at that moment that our world would never be the same.
Okay, so recording. All right.
one of the things that I can remember about 9/11, I can remember it like it was yesterday, was I had came into work, and coming into building 142 at that time, we had a monitor in which CNN was on, and I had looked up at the monitor, and one of the Twin Towers was burning, and I didn't think anything of it at that time. I was like, it was burning, and something might have happened. A fire might have had gotten was set. And so I go down to my office and I tell my roommate that did you look on CNN? One of the Twin Towers was burning. I think we should turn it on. So, and we turned it on and we watched it burn, and not within a minute, a plane hit the other building. So in my mind, I was like, uh-oh, that's not right. Something's not right. They had mentioned that one plane had hit the building, so I was like, well, maybe the pilot got mixed up, but two planes hitting both buildings. And so my instinct was, I got up and looked out in the hallway to see if anybody else had seen anything, or was there any type of commotion. And we looked at it, and my office mate and I thought, like, wow, something's not right. What has happened? Eventually, we had to go home, and we went home. My first gut feeling was I need to go to the daycare and then pick up my son. And on my way home, my wife had called me because she was in Building 500 at the time, and they had mentioned that there was a plane that had been taken over by some terrorists, and it was in Cleveland Hopkins airspace, and they wouldn't allow her to leave. And so she started crying, and I told her, don't worry about it, they'll let you leave. And when I got to the daycare, everyone was in a panic, and people were getting out the cars crying and stuff. So I went into the daycare, and my son I think he was maybe about 4 or 5 years old, and he asked me, he's like, Daddy, what happened? What's going on? I had told him that some bad men had did some terrible things to the country, and I was coming to get you out of daycare. That evening, eventually my wife had gotten home, and we sat down and we watched pretty much CNN all night, and just thinking about it, and I stayed up until wee hours of the morning, and I began to get teary-eyed, because in my mind, who would do something this terrible? Who would do something like that? But I can remember it pretty much plain as day, and that's pretty much my memories of 9/11.
9/11 was my first day at work, and it was also my wife's first day in Cleveland by herself to do an interview at the federal building. And I remember when this first started and I saw it on TV, it was a lot of shock and disbelief. But also remember when the second plane hit the building, you began to realize that it was an attack. It wasn't an accident. And one of the first thoughts that came to mind was what else was going to get hit and what else was going to happen. And I immediately thought about my wife being in the federal building, and I was kind of like, wow. And a little bit later, we heard that there was a plane flying over Cleveland, and I guess at that point, it became very evident that there was a lot happening going to happen that day. And I remember trying to get hold of her. The phones were all you couldn't get through on anything. All the cell phones were down. And it was quite an event for me personally. When the airplane hit the Pentagon, that was really a defining moment, because I had a lot of people that I worked with in the past that I knew were in the Pentagon, and I didn't know exactly the extent of the damage. I knew that it was significant, but we didn't know how much, and so I immediately thought about them. As I reflect back 10 years ago, you know, it was a very defining moment for our country, and it was certainly something that changed all of our lives. Every time you go to an airport, you realize how much it really changed the way we do business, and the freedoms that we lost that day, from that day forward. So it's quite an event. It's a shame to have lost all those innocent lives, the people that were killed during that event. None of them had anything to do with some of the anger that was out there, that we were being attacked for in the first place. So it was a horrible loss of life. It was certainly something that to be remembered, and it was quite an event.
My name is Randy Humphreys. On September 11th, 2001, I was at Michoud Assembly Facility outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. We were in meetings when I went into an adjacent room and saw a replay of the first plane hitting the first tower. Of course, we all congregated and watched TV for a little bit, and we saw the second plane hit the second tower. We were all in horror. We were all scared for our lives. We immediately terminated the meeting, shut down the plant, and everybody went home. Of course, I couldn't go home. I was on travel, and I went to my hotel in downtown New Orleans. I was scared because I was in a major metropolis. I was staying on the 21st floor of a tall building, and so I hurriedly went up to my room, put my stuff away, and came back downstairs. I watched on TV, as all of us did, as the horrible events unfolded. I called my family. I called my friends. We all watched that day in terrible horror. It had been years since the American soul had been attacked. As much as I was afraid, as much as I was scared, I was also, in the days to follow, proud. Proud of how we recovered, proud of how we came together, proud of how we helped each other, and proud of how eventually we became the strong America that we are again.
The morning of September 11th, I recall it very vividly. It'll be in my mind forever. I was ready early for work that morning, so I decided to listen in on NPR for the idea stream, and listen at the broadcast on NBC. Toward the end of that broadcast on NBC, they alerted that something had happened in New York, and of course later, before the end of that hour, they had some video in showing a plane running into the First Trade Center. I was shocked, but I immediately thought that it was a terrorist act, but I didn't want to overreact. Sort of come up with a quick concoction that maybe they'd gotten into the aviation ILS at one of the airports and directed the plane into the building in automatic pilot. The hour ended, and of course I was collecting my thought, but I didn't want to be incredible and call here at Glenn to Glenn and send out a false alert. When the next hour of NBC News started, they were still talking about the topic, and again they showed the videos of the crash into the tower, and then later they showed a plane going directly down one of the New York streets. And then while they were showing the tower in its demise state of after the plane had struck, I saw on the horizon another plane appear, and it made a steep maneuver, bank, if you want to call it, into the tower. And it ran directly into the tower. I saw an engine, I suppose it was an engine, come out the other side of the building and went down the street. And at that point I knew that it was a terrorist activity, and I thought that the nation was under attack. So I tried figuring out what I could do. I didn't know if Glenn was aware of it or not, so what I decided to do was call Mr. Bill Russell, he was the head senior manager for security here at that time. I was able to get in touch with him. We talked very briefly. I told him I thought the nation was under attack, and he said he would take it from there. I watched the rest of the news for that half hour, and then maybe into the next half hour. So I decided to drag in late. When I got in, of course, everyone was attracted to the TV if they had one near them. And later, we saw the collapse of the first tower, and of course, then there was the collapse of the second tower. At that point, I knew things were out of hand. I guess one of my big concerns about calling Bill is that it's easy for 100 or 200 people to be stationed out and create havoc around the nation. However, the attack on 9/11 was a little more controlled. Looks like it was about 4 planes involved only. And how has this affected me? For the first month or so, I was walking around, and I just have to admit, a little paranoia. You know, I wanted to do my best to prevent anyone else from getting hurt. Certainly now, if you get on a plane, you see the effect. You have to get screened very heavily for security. That's it.
I'm George Crawford, the NASA Counterintelligence Counterterrorism Special Agent assigned at Glenn Research Center. On September 11, 2001, I was an Air Force officer assigned to the Pentagon. I remember seeing the attacks on the World Trade Center and felt sick to my stomach, but I knew that we were under attack and had a job to do. Shortly thereafter, we were under attack at the Pentagon and had to evacuate. Some of our best military and civilian employees did not make it. As a member of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, we work with the FBI and the Department of Defense to identify any additional threats and investigate the attack on the Pentagon. The following days, we worked 24/7 from the Pentagon while it was still burning to gather intelligence to respond to the horrific attacks. I will never forget that day, and my heart goes out to the families who lost loved ones.
On September 11th, 2001, I was coming into work. I had just taken my boys, who were in the first grade, to daycare or to school, I can't remember which, in Pocosin, Virginia. After heading into work, I heard on the radio that this terrible event had occurred. I went on into Langley Research Center, where I was the emergency preparedness officer at the time, cut on the TV in my office, watched it, and was immediately struck that this was not an accident, but was a deliberate act by terrorists or people that wanted to harm the United States of America. I immediately went over and met with the center director at Langley Inn, Jerry Creedon, who happened to be visiting with Sam Veneri, the chief technologist for the agency. We had an orderly shutdown of the center and then had some telecons with NASA headquarters. I remember that the phone system was jammed and we had to use some special emergency communications capability in order to talk with NASA headquarters in Washington. What it meant for me was that this was the first time in my lifetime that the United States proper had been attacked on our soil by an enemy. I was very shocked, I was angry, and wanted us to get back.
On 9/11, I was at the Office of Government Ethics Annual Conference in Norfolk, Virginia. Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez was speaking. He was our welcome speaker. He began at 8 o'clock. He did announce to our group that the one tower was hit. He continued to welcome us with his comments. As he spoke, the second tower was hit. At that point, he told us he had to leave. He had to go back to Washington. He left by helicopter. as I can remember it, we were all told the conference was canceled. This was quite early in the morning yet. We all went back to our hotel rooms. We were told that the tunnels were closed, the highways were closed, the airspace was closed, our flights were canceled. So we stayed in the hotel. From my window viewpoint, I got to see the Mid-Atlantic Fleet. The Navy brought out the fleet into the bay. It was quite dynamic to see the destroyers. I had never seen anything that large before in my life. It was quite powerful. It was very frightening when we figured out that this wasn't initially just an accident. I was very proud of the United States. I felt safe somewhat over the power that from the Navy and seeing all the powerful ships. But I began to realize how vulnerable we are. At one point in my life, I always felt safe in the United States, and now I feel that we must be careful. That's how my life has changed.